Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makudiri. The time is 19 minutes past 9 Central African time, and we're going to segue to, I think, a story that sets the tone for the week. The Francesca Albanese report titled Gaza Genocide, a Collective Crime. In a powerful address to the United Nations General Assembly, Francesca Albanese accused 63 states of enabling, defending, or failing to stop the genocide that's currently unfolding in Gaza, and naming the state pariah state of Israel and highlighting the role of major powers such as the United States. But what makes this story especially pertinent for South Africa is the fact that Francesca delivered key parts of this presentation from our soil, our shores here in South Africa at the invitation of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And at some point, she also engaged with local civil society, with Salam Media being the host of that roundtable. And during her visit here in South Africa, she made mention of some very, very important points. The role of South Africa, the role of consumers, watching what you buy and where you spend your money, and how ultimately you could be funding this genocide. So, yeah, we'll be looking at some different aspects of that report. We'll be speaking to Tasneem Fredericks. She's a lawyer, writer, and an activist, and she'll help us break down the findings of the report, their implications, and the questions they raise for South Africa, the continent of Africa, and the global community. Tasneem, welcome to News and Views. Always a pleasure chatting to you, and looking forward to a very, very insightful conversation.
Likewise, assalamu alaikum to yourself, Salalo, and the listeners today and the viewers who are on live stream. Thank you for having me.
Most definitely, the pleasure's all ours. I think let's jump right into it. I'm sure you've taken a look at the report. You've analyzed it. If you could give a brief summary for our listeners, some of the key findings and claims that this report is finding, especially the idea of a collective crime and the complicity of some 63 states in this genocide.
Yeah, so Lalo, it's you know what Francesca's done is basically consolidated what we've been saying since January 2 years ago. I mean, after the ICJ case where the UN found, or rather the ICJ found a plausible case of genocide. I mean, that immediately triggered the mechanisms that allowed for embargoes of all member states to the Genocide Convention. So Francesca, her report, it's called Gaza, a collective crime. But I mean, we also know that there's been collective punishment from, long ago in terms of how Israel has perpetuated the occupation against the Palestinians in the West Bank. I mean, Gaza for a long time, for over 18 years was a siege, so when people like Helen Zilla, the DA, says, she doesn't know what's happening in Gaza. She's never been there. Nobody's been there. It's impossible to go there. There are people in Gaza that Palestinians who are born in Gaza who have never left Gaza. Similarly, there are Palestinians in occupied Palestine that have never seen the beaches in Haifa, because there are parts of Palestine that you and I can go and visit that they can't. So, I mean, this is the day-to-day, practical, on-the-ground situation with Palestinians for 77 years. And so, I mean, Francesca Albanese, the UN Rapporteur on Palestine, has been working on this for a very long time. She writes this paper dated 20 October and, historically delivers it from the Desmond Tutu conference where she delivers the paper for the first time to the UN General Assembly. And of course, Israel attacks and calls her a witch and denies that any of this has happened. So her report is quite extensive. It's 24 pages, but it's actually, as an attorney, as a lawyer, it's very easy to read. So anybody, even if you're not a lawyer, you could read that report. She sets it out very systematically. She draws very strongly on the very same international law that has been flagrantly violated by Israel since the beginning of time. So they have, and she speaks about, the UN actually being, sorry, I don't know what switch there. The UN actually expelling Israel or suspending Israel from the United Nations under Article 6 of the UN Charter, which I think is important. But in addition to suspending Israel, we need to talk about this veto right. We need to talk about the right that every time the US has to put up their hands, they'll get a black person, a black American, to put up their hand and say no to the ceasefire. And this has been ongoing because we're more than 2 years into the ceasefire. So the report is quite extensive. I think, if you look at the last page, she makes recommendations, and I can take you through that quickly. Given the emergency, she says, she speaks about exerting pressure for a complete and permanent ceasefire and full withdrawal of Israeli troops. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, if we look on the 16th of September 2025, the UN Commission of Inquiry in any event concluded that Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. So again and again, we see this repetition where the ICJ said during our case, and other countries have since joined, that there is a genocide happening in Gaza. And so in terms of the Genocide Convention, one would have thought 2 years ago, I mean, none of this should be groundbreaking for any member state. They should know their obligation. They would have been able to easily, employ trade embargoes and all of the things that are listed in our recommendations. That was given to them 2 years ago. But she consolidates all of that, and she says, now you can know that you can do it again. And I'm not sure. Why we would be living in a country, and it's so bizarre and dystopian to be living in a country where we are leading a case at the ICJ, one of the only first countries doing that, being joined later, having the courage and the moral conviction to do that, but then sending coal to fund the same war, in Gaza. So there's that kind of contradiction that even as South Africa, we are participating in. So, our hands are both clean and dirty. The top is clean and the underside is not very clean. So we need to examine that. She talks about taking immediate steps to end the siege, including, and I think this is the important part, including naval and land convoys to ensure safe humanitarian access and mobile housing before winter. So the siege that has been implemented against Gaza at the moment is both Israel and Egypt. It's both of them. I don't understand how, under international law, a country can say their border is not their border and they cannot open it. Imagine if Egypt had decided to open their border. The humanitarian aid corridor, which the Sumud convoy and the flotilla had tried to do, would not have been necessary. And I think the important part about I know I'm mixing up issues here, but I think it's important to note that with the flotilla that left, there were 8 South Africans that could easily have not come back. The fact that they came back is a victory, it's a celebration. But I think, when we are dealing with someone or with an entity, with a Zionist entity like Israel, who shows us who they are, who continuously shows us that they think nothing of human life, we still have an expectation that they're not going to do anything. We still had an expectation that despite being imprisoned, they were not going to be killed or kept there forever, under inhumane conditions, by the way. And what should have happened was that South Africa should have sent a naval convoy to escort them through international waters. I mean, I don't understand how Israel can lay claim to international waters. Are they going to say that Hamas has tunnels under the sea now? Yeah, the ludicrousness and nothing they say makes sense. And yet, most of the world, you look at the report and she talks about 63 states that are, the complicity is now no longer just, that she says they've moved from complicity to direct participation. So they're aiding and abetting. They are part and parcel of the crimes. And so when we talk about asking that warrants of arrest be issued against Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, we should be including the leaderships of those states that are actually directly participating in these genocidal war crimes. And be careful that it won't be one of us living here when we are sending coal that is funding, literally, a genocide. And how easy we make it for Israelis to live here and to enter South Africa. There are so many issues. She says in a report, she says one of the recommendations then goes on to say reopen the international airport and the port to facilitate aid delivery. And this is what she's actually saying is lift the siege.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. And then she says, beyond the emergency, states must recognize the Palestinian self-determination and justice, and therefore suspend all military trade and diplomatic relations with Israel. Again, this is in line with the Genocide Convention. She asks for investigations and prosecutions of all officials, corporates, and individuals involved in or facilitating the genocide, incitement, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and other grave breaches of international. So a lot of what she says is rooted and centered in international law, which Israel and the United States and Egypt totally disregard. One of the nice things that I specifically like about her recommendation is she speaks about securing reparations, including full reconstruction and return. And I think one of the essential demands of Palestinians are the right to return. And you will know, as a Black South African, we did not get our land back. We didn't get the exact piece of land back that our parents and grandparents lived at. So the reparation part also, I'm involved at the South End Museum, and we're looking at, reopening the George Botha inquest. And I'm told by, survivors that, at that stage, TRC only gave 10,000 Rand per family member. So I just hope that when they speak about reparation, there's going to be a Palestinian sovereign wealth fund. Because if you look at how many billions Germany is still giving to Jewish Holocaust survivors, then that's the kind of money that we need to be looking at here. That's the kind of money that we should be looking at here. The list goes on. She says cooperate fully with the ICC and the ICJ. She says support and strengthen UNRWA and UN systems as a whole. And then, like I said, the suspension of Israel from the United Nations. And I don't think it must only be Israel. It should be the US and Germany and other entities that are key role players in blocking the liberation of Palestinians as a whole.
Most definitely. I want to switch to, something a bit, more practical from a layperson's point of view. She invoked consumer responsibility. And there's a quote that I want to pull up here from the report, where she essentially says, check what you buy, make sure there's no political choice hidden in what you purchase. How realistic is this idea of individual responsibility, and how might it connect with broader structural interventions? Just me, Salilo, ordinary young person from here in Johannesburg, and the impact that I might have in this genocide. Can we stress on that a bit?
Salalo, I was part of organizing the Woolworths boycott campaign, and it's very difficult, and even the Zionists will poke fun at us by saying to us that everything we use comes from Israel. Our medical aid, the medication. So I think for the BDS campaign to be effective, it needs to be targeted. So we can all decide that we don't drink Coca-Cola. Maybe, but Coca-Cola is not just Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola also makes water. Coca-Cola also makes Fanta. So people think if they order Sprite, they're not ordering Coke. So I think there's a lot of education. And to be quite honest, I find it very heartwarming that people, we must meet people where they are at. You can't meet, BDS is a non-violent movement, which is good, which is great. But more important than BDS, I would say, is we need military intervention. We need a Peace Corps to go in there. Israel is not Israel is not, they don't care who doesn't drink Coke. They don't care who don't buy from Cape Union Mart. It does hurt the image. So I think important from a layperson perspective, yes, do not embarrass yourself and have weddings where the whole table is filled with Coke. Because I think for me, that is symbolic. It means that we are now, translating in our own minds and in our own homes, and the conversation at the dinner table with the youth and the children that we are going to, that are the future of South Africa and the world, is going to understand, the moral conviction with which we're fighting this. So it's important that we do things like a BDS. I don't know how effective it is if you can expect people to boycott everything. And what happened with the Woolworths campaign was that we eventually got to a point where we engaged with Woolworths at an AGM, and they had made certain concessions in terms of no longer selling Israeli products. Because the point is, what was happening is Muslim people in particular, were going to Woolworths during Eid for the clothing and the malva puddings. So they wouldn't buy for the whole 9 months, but then during Eid, they would go to Woolies for 1 or 2 days and say, I just need to get this, that, and the other. So I think we need to be serious about how it's a small sacrifice for the sacrifice that Palestinians are enduring, especially for Muslims. They are the defenders of our deen. And I think, when you look at the number of Palestinian orphans and the limbless Palestinian men, women, and children who are casualties of this collective punishment that Israel has been implementing since Operation Cast Lead, which is way back in 2009 and 2010, I almost feel like the luxury of BDS should be a given. I mean, people mustn't even think about it, because we are so far down the line. It's been 77 years of, Palestinians struggling just to live in a normal society where you're not under military occupation. And I think the military occupation is one thing. The second thing is that you're living in a country where there is an economic genocide. So when the genocide broke out in Gaza, all the shops in the old city immediately shut down. They closed it. So people that are not in Gaza are suffering in terms of they don't have money. They don't have businesses. When the genocide broke out, everybody in the West Banks, the papers to cross over were cancelled. So they had no jobs and they had no money and they were going hungry there. So while everybody was watching Gaza, there was a lot of suffering happening in occupied Palestine as well. I mean, they had India coming over, bringing their workers to replace the Palestinians that they disallowed from entering, through the checkpoints, occupied Palestine. And so there's, this thing is so layered, it's so complex. I think, my main thing is there is so much to learn about Palestine. When I visited the Jerusalem Legal Aid Center, there are campaigns that South Africans can join in terms of, so when your child is killed by what they call a terrorist attack, they withhold the body. So they've got fridges, morgues of bodies that families have to go to court for 8 years at a time. That costs them money to get those bodies back, so that they can at least have closure in terms of burying their dead martyred sons and daughters possibly as well. So the BDS is a small thing. It's a small, tiny little ask. It's like breathing. You're not even supposed to brush your teeth in the morning. Nobody talks about it because it's supposed to be that way. You assume people when they wake up, they brush it. This is how we should be implementing BDS. It should be a natural thing for us. It shouldn't be a hard thing for us to do because it's so tiny, it's so small, and because we are so far down the line in terms of how Palestinians have been struggling. I don't want to hear about BDS anymore. We must just implement it. And people must stop talking about implementing it. They must just do it, and it does help. It does help. And we must put pressure on our government. And also, I don't know why we still have the Israeli flag flying in Pretoria. That's disgusting to me. That's revolting to me. That makes me want to throw up, honestly. So we need to start holding, as shareholders in this company called South Africa, we need to start holding our government accountable, because they do answer to us. They must answer to us, and we must make them get rid of that flag, number one. And then also, I mean, the PA Bantustan. We can't close the Palestinian embassy, obviously, we cannot. But when Palestine is free, we should actually be planning for the freedom of Palestine. What happens post-liberation? Because liberation is going to come. That when date, that date we don't have, but are we prepared for what must happen after that? We can't only be stuck in, you know, this fact that Palestinians are never going to be free and BDS until we die. No, Palestine needs to be free, and we need to take measures that are going to accelerate that, because while we're sleeping, the Zionists are awake and planning and intensifying the Zionist efforts. Whereas we are like just very, you know, stop drinking Coke type of situation. You know, that is really, we need to do more and we need to intensify our efforts. And we should be speaking with one voice, and we should be centering. And I think this is the most important thing for me. We have allies in the liberation movement, and allies are very important. But what we must never forget is the Palestinian voice, that we must center Palestinians, that there must be nothing about them without them.
Most definitely. And I think we're going to even that note, Tasneem. Thank you so much for unpacking those very, very important aspects of this report. I think it's a bit extensive, and I think everyone and anyone who cares about Palestine and who cares about humanity should take a look at it. But yeah, really appreciate your time and chatting to you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
There you go, lawyer, writer, and activist Tasneem Fredericks, unpacking some of the elements of that report by Francesca Albanese, which essentially expose the complicity of some of the countries worldwide, and to some extent, even ours here in South Africa. We were still doing trade business with Israel. Sending our call to that part of the world, essentially funding, essentially lighting up this genocide and making sure that it is powered. So yeah, I think very interesting report, and I think it was a big pleasure having Francesca Albanese here in South Africa. And I think it adds just that bit of more chaos when it comes to the strong Palestinian solidarity that's present in the country. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be heading over to Zimbabwe, where there's an interesting turn of affairs in that part of the country.